Hello, my name is Lee Ullman, and I'm the Senior Director of the MIT Sloan Latin America office. This office is a programming office that works in Latin America to bring MIT knowledge to the region. I thank all of you for being here today, and I thank our three speakers, Professor Alex Slocum, Andres Bisonó, and Luke Gray. So this project is part of the MIT Sloan Latin America Office seed funds. These seed funds are used to bring MIT research to Latin America and the Caribbean. And this year, we've funded the sustainability and the Caribbean, a solution to the Sargassum seaweed invasions. This project is an ongoing project that came out of Professor Slocum's class. And as many of you know, Professor Slocum is a huge supporter of the Latin America office and all things that help the planet and make the world a better place. So without further ado, I just want to welcome all of you here today. I'd also like to thank May from the MIT Sloan Global Programs for making this happen. And now I'm going to turn over the mic to Alex. Just one thing though, please feel free to use the chat and the questions. For the questions, you can upvote questions. So if you like someone else's question, please upvote it. Also, the idea is to make this as interactive as possible. So please don't hesitate to raise your hand, ask questions, use the chat. And what we've asked our speakers is to speak for about half an hour and then leave about a half an hour of time for discussion. So please, Alex, all yours. Thank you again.
Thank you, Lee. Okay, so the background here is I've been working in machinery and gizmos and offshore and for a long, long time. And I love the region, I love people. And Andres Bisonó reached out to me I don't know, about 4 or 5 years ago as not as an MIT student, but someone who wanted to come to MIT for graduate school. And we had a lot of discussions about things. He ended up inviting me to his native home of the Dominican Republic to give a talk on energy systems. Beautiful island, beautiful people. Sargassum had not really started going crazy then, but you could see hints of it. I came back and Luke Gray was an undergraduate student of mine and looking for a really great master's thesis. And then I get the email from Andreas that says, the Sargassum is going totally crazy, bonzo, help. And we just put it all together and formed this wonderful team to develop ideas. Andreas helped manage it and secure opportunity in the DR to test our systems. Luke, his thesis to make, and we then tested them. And this is the story of that and where it's come to now. And SOS Carbon, if you think about it, it's really what the planet is SOS, help, help, panic, emergency. Carbon is an issue. But it also is a really nice descriptor of what they're calling their company. It's Sargassum Ocean Sequestration. So without further ado, I'm going to let them take over and tell you all what we did and where they're going. And then when question and answers, we can talk about opportunities to move forward further. So Luke, take it away. And Andreas, I'm sorry, Andreas is going to introduce.
Yeah. Thank you again for the kind introduction, Alex, and all the support you have given to the team and to the Caribbean at large. Thank you again, Lee and May, for putting this together and the support you have given us since our roots back in 2018. So getting straight to the point, Sargassum. Starting in 2011, Sargassum invasions have been causing many problems in the Caribbean. The invasions affect several areas, including tourism by damaging the pristine beaches, public health by emitting toxic gases once it rots on shore or on the coast, local economies by the economic impact to their life supporting activities like fishing, and to the environment in many areas, including ecology, releasing back CO2, corals, and to other marine species. Sargassum has a direct impact which has been quantified. Given the importance of tourism for the Caribbean, the percentage decrease will put the economies in risk. Tourism provides more than 50% direct GDP and about the same percentage of jobs. According to the Minister of Tourism of Jamaica, tourism had already decreased from 25 to 35% due to sargassum alone. It is important to visualize the magnitude of the problem. This is how our coasts and beaches look like, not only in the DR, but across the Caribbean. It has been 1 decade of this. Stakeholders need to come together and start taking action. It is unacceptable. It has been even worse for civilians and artisanal fishermen who struggle in their daily life to manage around sargassum. So what are we doing to help? As Alex kindly introduced, we started back in 2018 our path to develop systems and technologies to best manage the sargassum before it invades the beaches. We also focus on developing methods that will allow us to turn the problem into a benefit and thus a chain of value. Through our journey, we have interacted with global leaders to understand firsthand how to best help the region and how to integrate the different solutions into each country and what they do in their daily activities. We participated in several roundtables with international leaders and international conference exposing our proposed solutions. But now we should take a step further and start implementing these solutions, not just leaving it at these wonderful conversations. A big thank to our research sponsors who have made these possible. Also, a shout out to all the team members who, from the very beginning, have helped make these research and the developed technologies a reality. Look.
So now we're going to go through the systems that we developed. Before I touch on these, I should just say that, because it wasn't in the background, the current solutions across the Caribbean have basically been thus far manual cleanup. On 99% of beaches, it's either civilians cleaning their own beaches, or even on high tourist, high value tourist locations, it's hiring hundreds and hundreds of people to go out there and shovel sargassum, one guy to the next, to a truck, to a landfill, every single morning, in the hope of getting beaches clean enough for tourists to be on them. They've also installed some barriers, kilometers of floating barrier that are very vulnerable they're very expensive, but also very vulnerable to storms. And when large amounts of sargassum come, the sargassum just pushes right underneath the barrier. So they also have special boats and barges that go out and start cleaning the sargassum from the barriers. Those are recycled from lake cleaning, from the lake cleaning sphere, if you will. So we looked at the problem, and there was certainly a really good effort into trying to bring some engineering solutions to bear that had responded really quickly to the initial crisis, which began in 2011. But as an R&D effort, we wanted to have sort of an ambitious scope that we thought could be an ultimate long-term solution to the problem. So the first technology that we conceived of, and this was basically what the 2 years of research focused on, was the SOS Carbon system, Sargassum Ocean Sequestration. It's an open ocean vessel that is meant to intercept sargassum in the open ocean and sequester it via pumping it to a depth where it becomes negatively buoyant. And the second system that we developed was sort of at the tail end of the research, and I'll sort of explain the connection and the pivot that we made. But the second system we call the littoral collection module. It's essentially a really low cost modular device that retrofits onto any small artisanal fishing boat in the Caribbean and allows those workers to collect sargassum in the water before it makes landfall. Andres, next slide, please. Okay, so the first system, again, it's an open ocean vessel. This is the pilot vessel that we built with the Dominican Republic Navy. over the course of the fall of 2019. It's a stern deck vessel, and we shipped 15,000 pounds of equipment down there. It's modular equipment, so we basically put pad eyes on the deck that holds all this stuff down, and it comes off in just a few hours, basically. So what you have in the center is a 5,000 gallon per minute pump, skid mounted. It can be shipped anywhere in the world, and it can handle solids up to 5 inches. It's a mining pump, so it can pump rocks, not just seaweed. And then we have a hose reel that was custom built to deploy a 200-meter polyurethane lay flat hose over the back of the ship off of the stinger. It has rollers on it. And then we built our own crane that deploys the inlet device into the water on the port side of the ship. We did not use a J-boom, this orange boom, in our pilot tests to save cost, for simplicity, and because this wasn't a real operation. But in the future, you could add a J-boom to increase your collection width for a vessel like this. And you could imagine several of these modular systems deployed in parallel, even from a single ship. So imagine 4 to 6 of these with a ship up to 30,000 gallon per minute pumping capacity, pumping Sargassum at 30% solids concentration, which we were able to do. So this is kind of the vision, and the reason why this technology seemed so compelling to us, and the reason why we pursued it so aggressively, was because of what it promises, which is basically 2 or 3 of these vessels in Punta Cana could replace 50 kilometers of barrier, hundreds of workers, tens of collection boats, with just a few of these open ocean vessels. Because the primary advantage is that if you can address Sargassum, if you can see it coming and you can address it 10, 20, 50, 100 kilometers before it makes landfall, the amount of capital resources that you need to address that Sargassum is much, much smaller. So that was the primary advantage that we saw. And besides that, it just being simple. So the primary concept here is that you intercept the Sargassum and you pump it to a depth of about 150 to 200 meters. That's the depth at which the air bladders on the Sargassum that keep it buoyant become compressed sufficiently that the Sargassum becomes negatively buoyant and just keeps sinking all by itself. Next slide, please, Andres. Andres, next slide, please. Okay.
Yeah.
So
it is.
So we considered the pilot test by and large very successful, besides a few pre-planned modifications that we ended up making because of the initial tests. The system ended up being, it was very thoughtfully designed. It was very rugged. We were able to pump a whole lot of Sargassum down, even though there wasn't much during the time that we were testing. And we were also able to, track fuel consumption, work out any kinks with operation and maintenance, and also teach the Navy crew of the vessel to operate and maintain this equipment as well. And they're currently still the stewards of this technology, and I think are eager to start operating it. Next slide, please, Andres. Okay, so we filed patents on this open ocean technology and also on a barge variation that would accumulate Sargassum that is collected onshore, via hand collection or collection from barriers, as is currently done. And it could be taken to this barge that's moored very close to shore and then taken offshore for pumping down. So we saw this as a way to sort of bridge the gap between our vision ultimately for the Caribbean and the current methods of cleanup, which are the reality. Next slide, Andres. So we had some key learnings from our pilot tests, and we also had, some realities that we had to deal with as a company. We decided at the end of the research and development, we needed to start the company. We needed to try to bring these solutions to bear for the Caribbean. To survive as a company, we need to operate within, not just our research and development program, but now within the real world. We need to provide real valuable services to people. And that meant, first of all, solving the problem for tourism industry, and then being able to help solve the problem for the entire Caribbean. So we realized through the pilot test that the open ocean vessel can be successful, and it can work technically, and it can also be profitable, especially with carbon credits. But it's going to depend on satellite technology getting a little bit better. There's a really cool French company that's making some really sophisticated models to identify sargassum with really high resolution, see through cloud cover, and predict where it's going to land. And that's what's necessary for not just being effective and avoiding sinking sargassum that's not going to hit a beach. So only sinking sargassum that is going to hit a high value area. And it's also necessary for determining additionality for carbon credits, because you need to know that it was going to land on a beach, decompose anaerobically, and create methane emissions. So there's a company that we're partnered with that is very actively pursuing that, now that we've created this sort of end effector that can actually go out and do this. They're adapting their technology, so it's not just for forecasts, but can actually be used to plan and operate an open ocean operation like this. We're attempting to license and develop the barge and the open ocean vessel in select locations. For example, Cancun gets a ton of sargassum. They have all this infrastructure. So the idea would be to have an open ocean vessel there that can skim off the top of the sargassum that they get 50 to 75% of it, such that they don't need to have so many workers and so many boats and so many barriers, and all that equipment does not take as much wear and tear by just putting a couple of vessels offshore. But the SOS system cannot guarantee 100% clean beaches, which is pretty much what they need. That is going to constitute the solution. Maybe for civilian beaches, 100% clean beach is not what they need, but for tourist beaches, if it's even there in small quantities, right, it is visually polluting, it is offending to the senses, et cetera. It hurts tourism still. So SOS Carbon does not necessarily eliminate the need for all that nearshore infrastructure unless the satellite technologies can get really, really effective. So again, the barge could still be very useful in locations like that, because with carbon credits, the barge can actually beat the cost of landfill, for example, and be profitable if carbon prices are fair and they reach the levels that we hope and think that they will reach. But again, we need to survive as a company right now. We need to bring these solutions to bear for the Caribbean right now. And so we decided that we needed to create something that was going to be able to create a complete solution immediately. And so we knew that composting and there's other kinds of ways of disposing of the sargassum that would be sustainable. And we just need to create a technology that is really low cost, really effective, and can rapidly scale. And that's exactly what the LCM is. So we completely reinvented the collection system for sargassum. Again, it's just a bunch of welded aluminum parts that get retrofit onto a ponga boat, or a yola as they're called in the Dominican Republic. And so extremely low cost and toolless as well. So it can literally be built with an angle grinder, a drill, and a welder, and some aluminum supply, very simple parts. And so it can be built and repaired really anywhere in the world. It's extremely safe, and it goes onto a boat in less than 10 minutes. And so basically the idea is that you have two hoops that hold nets on either side of the boat. They flip up and down. So you have men that are tying nets on and off the boat, on and off of these hoops. You're filling them. Each net fills in a minute to 2 minutes. It takes 20 to 30 seconds for an operator to tie a new net onto the hoop. And then you're leaving these floating bags of sargassum in the water to either float on shore where they're towed away, or you pick up the nets and you tow them to access points on the beach. So these vessels can be used to collect sargassum from barriers or from very close to the beach. But the point is, create a very low cost way of increasing the collection capacity per person while also getting the sargassum in the water before it makes landfall. This is us testing in Punta Cana last summer. Okay, next slide, Andres. So this is kind of an illustration of what an operation would look like. This is Punta Cana, group of Punta Cana in the DR, a very high value tourist area. The orange lines represent the barriers that they currently have. So we would be planning to operate these devices on the outside of the barrier or even on the inside of the barrier so that you're only collecting sargassum that leaks through and thereby being extremely effective about where you're spending your resources. You know, the coral reefs and certain areas where the current is stronger create more forcing and create more leakage in certain areas. So a lot of hotels see it as a way of maximizing the effectiveness of their barriers and only cleaning where it leaks through, which the current machines cannot do because they're too big. And this is kind of the analog to what we've created. And this is what the really high value tourist areas are looking at using right now is these conveyor boats that are essentially recycled lake cleaners, you know, for cleaning lake weeds in India and China and Canada and different places. They're not meant for saltwater use. They're not meant for open water use. And unless there've been a couple that have been purpose designed, but a lot of the ones that were meant for lakes don't perform very well. So to take you through a couple of these points, so the LCM is a fraction of the cost of one of these conveyor boats. The lead time is also a fraction. The collection capacity is comparable. The OpEx is significantly lower. You know, we're talking about $1 versus sometimes upwards of $100 per meter cubed for some of these large conveyor machines. The response time, these artisanal boats can be out there in literally a minute if you get a mat, whereas these other boats are run off of huge HPU engines and they take an hour to start up and an hour to you know, shut down and clean and spray and squeegee everything down at the end of the day because the sargassum in the salt water is very corrosive. The LCM can clean basically all day because it's such a low marginal cost, whereas the conveyor boats can only be taken out once there is enough sargassum such that it's worth it to take it out and do all that work. The shallow draft of the LCM allows you to basically clean anywhere, breakwaters, or even as you saw in one of the last photos, within meters of beach in the intertidal zone, right? So you can clean sargassum up to the very last second, and it's almost easier to just push sargassum back into the water and collect it with an LCM than it is to shovel it through a chain of men up into a truck. So it's much easier to just push it back into the water and then transport it via water, right? The LCM, obviously these boats are everywhere. And so the visual pollution is much less and it's just much lower impact on the beaches and the local ecology. So as I said, the device is obviously engineered. We're all engineers. We over-engineer everything and design for mass manufacturing. Next slide, Andres. It fits on really any Ponga boat, or even like during our tests, we had it on, you know, a Ponga boat with a monocoque in it with a central console. So it can really go on any boat less than 15 feet, less than a 10-inch rail. And one of the last benefits that I want to touch on is, you know, we're basically taking personnel from the beach and putting them onto these boats. We're increasing the collection capacity per person by over 10x, but we're also removing the workers, right? There are hundreds of them in Cancun right now shoveling sargassum. We're removing them from these really unhealthy work environments that they've been coping with for a decade now, where you have hydrogen sulfide and corrosive particulate matter that they're literally breathing in that causes nausea and respiratory irritation. We're taking them out of that work environment, putting them on a boat in high mobility, doing higher value work. Next slide, Andres. And the other part of that, I forgot to mention, when you wait for sargassum to hit the beach and it gets sand in it, it's then very difficult to do anything with it except just put it in landfill. So that's another key part that we're going to get to now is, right, we're not sinking currently. We're not building any barges currently. We need a complete solution. The LCM is a keystone, but we also, one of the main things that it does is it now allows you to explore many different options for valorization of the sargassum, which is absolutely fundamental to making it sustainable in the short term. Andres, go ahead.
So MIT research has enabled SOS Carbon and our technical team to offer the tools that create and promote a platform for sustainable tourism, environmental and marine ecosystem protection by providing environmental sanitation and waste management, the means for CO2 sequestration, either by sinking to death or other methods as utilization of sargassum for later usage in agricultural purposes, social impact through direct employment to the artisanal fishermen. In summary, we are looking to deploy the LCMs Caribbean-wide to bring that support that the Caribbean needs to manage sargassum invasions as soon as possible. There is an opportunity and the need to create a circular solution. And for that purpose, we have partnered and we collaborating with experts on the matter of processing and valorization of sargassum in the areas of composting, liquid fertilizer, high value chemicals extraction, and biomass, among others. We'll just skip through this, and for time purposes, Luke.
Yeah, sure. So again, one of the main reasons why we want to avoid landfill is not just because of the methanogenesis and contributions to global warming, but also because it's little known, but sargassum has a very high concentration of toxic elements, specifically arsenic. These are results of our own ICP-MS test at MIT, where we confirmed others' findings that it has about 500 times the allowable amount of arsenic. So this is Punta Cana, and you can see that some of the landfill locations where we took these samples from are literally right behind the hotels, and they shouldn't really be called landfills. They're literally open pits. You know, there's no geotextiles, there's no landfill gas recovery, there's no topsoil aeration or anything. So not only do they produce a lot of methane, but they pose a real public health and public relations issue were this arsenic to leach into the water supply. Next slide. And this is sort of a visualization of what we think the carbon offsetting potential could be for our project. We're helping to clean up more sargassum, and we're helping to do it more sustainably. So this is compared to some of the other, global carbon sequestration, carbon removal methods, if you will. Afforestation down at the bottom is really the only method that's been used commercially and fully exploited, used to its full potential worldwide. And the blue DAX is direct air capture. So that's literally sucking CO2 out of the air. So these are some of the big ideas that are out there in terms of carbon reduction. And there's a lot more creative and lower marginal cost methods of taking carbon out of the air that are being developed, not just ours. And while they have less potential, they generally are lower on the cost curve than some of these other technologies that are getting billions of dollars of investment. So if you walk your way up the marginal cost curve, it just makes complete common sense to be pursuing many solutions like SOS Carbon first now, before we start using some of these other methods that promise higher potentials that won't be able to be used until carbon prices reach $300, $400, for example. Go ahead, Andres.
Yeah, so thank you again for joining us. And now we'll let the floor for the Q&A. Again, the SOS Carbon team is always committed to helping the Caribbean. Any feedback also that anyone might have, please bring them up, and welcome to, happy to answer any questions that the audience might have. Thanks for joining us.
So thank you, Luke and Andres. I'm running through some of the questions, and one of the questions that seems to be of concern to many people is the issue of bycatch, and specifically several have asked about the sea turtles who use the sargassum to float across or protection. So if you can, maybe we can start there in terms of how you're dealing with bycatch and sea turtles.
Sure. So for the open ocean system, right, that's obviously a primary concern because there's 123 endemic species to Sargassum. It is very critical in the open ocean. So first of all, I just want to say that our plan is not to extinguish Sargassum in the open ocean. Our plan is to only ever manage Sargassum that is destined to land on the beach, right, where all of that marine life, unless it abandons it, is going to unfortunately be killed anyway. And I'm not saying that to brush off that issue at all. Obviously, there needs to be countermeasures, new engineering that's added on to our current system to deal with that problem as much as possible. But in the end, a lot of the animals that live in Sargassum, the reason why you find so many dead animals in Sargassum on the beach is precisely because they don't abandon the mats. When they get scared, a lot of the organisms actually cling on to the mats and they actually just ride them right into their doom on the beaches, where you have anaerobic digestion, eutrophication of the water, and then all the animals and the seagrasses and the corals suffocate, right? So there's that aspect to it that I just want to make sure is clear. As far as the LCM, we've not had a single bycatch issue. When it gets to that point at the beach and when you're working so intimately with the nets, we've never had in all of our testing a single bycatch event. And then even after you've collected Sargassum, it's not like you're immediately picking it up and putting it into a truck. You're actually towing it through the water. You're letting the water drain out, and then you're putting it on a trailer or a truck to bring it to be composted, for example. As far as sea turtles in the open ocean, again, we're not trying to destroy natural habitat. We're only collecting Sargassum that's going to make landfall anyway. But I actually do think that there is some research that points to the fact that relationship between sea turtles and Sargassum may be a little bit exaggerated in some cases. I think there are certain kinds of sea turtles, specifically in Jamaica. I think there's a very strong correlation, but it's not everywhere in the Caribbean. There's been a lot of research that shows that sea turtles will actually hide and congregate in any floating structure that they can possibly find. But it's really not relevant at the scale that we're talking about and with the selectivity that we're using as well.
Thanks, Luke. So another question is, and I'm trying to bring some of the questions together, is what sort of policy interventions are in place in the Caribbean to address the Sargassum challenge at the national and regional levels? And then thinking about that, there are other countries like Mexico who are also working on this issue because of the effects to their tourism industry. So have you guys been involved, or do you know of any national or regional level groups who are trying to work on the issue? What's your feeling about how the region is trying to address this as a whole?
So from what we have seen, as you all mentioned, Lee, Mexico is very advanced in terms of taking action at the government level and uniting the private sector to also require them to take appropriate measure. From our experience in other countries, each one is doing their individual efforts, but they haven't yet taken that step to really take action against the problem and what it represents, employing effective solutions. What we have seen across are just utilizing people to clean beaches once Sargassum already makes landfall, which is obviously too late. So we're working, especially in the DR, to come together with the government and all the stakeholders to start implementing a program to effectively cope with the Sargassum problem. But to your point, we need to do better in terms of, as a regional level, to cope and implement these solutions.
And, a continuation question is, are there permits needed? Government agencies, what's the situation? Because one of the participants, Chris, is mentioning the state's party to the London Convention of 1972. So what has gone on? I know in the DR, you're working directly with the government and the Navy, but do you have a sense, let's say a small fisherman, you're able to get one of these machines on their boat, they're going out there. Are there going to be government regulations, permits for this, or what's your feeling? Because ultimately, and I think it's one of the things that Alex and I had spoken about, giving people jobs, especially now with the pandemic, right? This could provide more than one use, not only help the environmental issue, but also prevent people from losing their work. So what is your feeling about permits and agencies involved?
That's a great point, Lee. To your point, it not only creates a benefit through direct employment, but also providing environmental sanitation, which it shouldn't be a no-brainer that the benefit or the permit, obviously depending on the area of operation, should be kind of immediately granted. In the DR, our experience, and to comply with all the regulations, we took charge before starting operations to have all these permits set by the environmental agencies. And from what we have seen, it varies country by country. So hopefully, now that there is a movement behind attacking the sargassum issue, governments will make it easier for companies to operate and offer such services.
Yeah. So if I could jump in, we have permits to do our nearshore collection operation. That is our current business. So I don't think there's any question that, right, the LCM allows you to clean up more sargassum and to do it more sustainably, the collection and the disposal, or valorization, I should say. Right. So we have permits to do that, and that's kind of all neatly put in place. The open ocean system, again, that's not happening in the near future. But I do want to emphasize that, sargassum, it comes from nutrients that are basically upwelled off the west coast of Africa, or blown in from the Sahara Desert, or in from the Congo River, or the Amazon River. And so I think that the London Protocol, we looked at that very early on, that only relates to man-made materials, sort of inorganics, if you will. So dumping sargassum back into the ocean is not technically in violation of the London Protocol, which the DR is signed onto. We've gotten the opinion of the Maritime Affairs Minister there, and no one in the ministries seem to think that it's a problem, as long as you're not doing it in an extremely biodiverse area. But there is certainly a research question that needs to be addressed, which is, how does all that organic enrichment affect deep sea ecology? I think a really interesting analog is the current deep sea mining project that's going on in the Clarion-Clipperton zone. And the only way that happened was, they start doing the pilot project, and the scientists are right there on another boat studying it in parallel. So it's unfortunate. We were in contact with deep sea ecologists from the very beginning, asking them what they thought, if they wanted to do joint proposals with us, et cetera. We were almost going out of our way to try to publicize that question and get people to work on it. But unfortunately, I don't think that it's going to happen until we're actually out there doing it. And so, what we recommend is that this be done in a very concentrated area, which is basically what the barge allows for, right? Is to be sinking in a very concentrated area for a period of time and study and monitor it before you start doing it wholesale across the entire Caribbean. So that's the unfortunate reality of doing anything like this. But there's really no research either that we could make a hypothesis on. I think the only other research that's been done into organic enrichment is the kelp beds off of Southern California. And again, it's really inconclusive what's out there in terms of, does organic enrichment help or hurt the benthic ecosystem? There has been some research that's shown that sargassum it sinks naturally. So there has been observational experiments that have shown that sargassum is found at depths as great as 3,500 kilometers, and it is used as food and shelter for benthic animals.
Hey, Luke, let me stop you there, because again, the audience seems to be really engaged and a lot of great questions. And thinking about this sinking, I know you're saying there's no research, but what's your guys' feeling about hypoxic areas when it goes down to depth? Is that something that you've thought of? What's your overall thinking about it in terms of what the impact may be?
Oh, can I jump in on that, Lee?
Absolutely. Alex, good to hear from you.
I think there's two things we have to look at. We have to first look at the Earth as a whole system. And how do you minimize the damage to the planet that we've created by dumping all sorts of nutrients into the water and increasing the temperature of the water? The sargassum, I think there's pretty much agreement that the sargassum that's washing up is due to that human activity. So how do we use this sadness as a happiness? And that's what that little symbol is, right? In terms of trying to sequester the carbon. Now, if we grab it, sequester it, and cause more damage deep sea, which then somehow has nth order effects to even hurt us more, that's bad. We do know currently now it's wrecking the shores, so that's not good. So as Luke described, it's very important that we start cleaning up at least in the tourist areas, because tourism enables lots of other jobs that if people don't have jobs, they're going to go somewhere they can find jobs and cause mass troubles. You know, not that the people cause trouble, but if an area that has people empties out, what happens to that area, right? So in the short term, we believe that this solution, which can employ people with the littoral collection modules and clean up tourist beaches, needs to happen right away now. Now, you start sequestering it by sending it down deep. The science to study what happens also has to happen right away now in tandem. We can't wait for the science to figure it out, because the science can't figure it out unless stuff is falling down to measure. So it really should be carefully designed experiments. And I think that's what the hope is here, that we'll be able to get the scientists on board and the funding for them to work side by side with us.
Yeah, so it seems in the chat there is an article that John Millage has posted for you guys, but also just something to think about. So what's the business model? Somebody's asking, are you looking for the hotels to cover the costs? Who's going to pay for it? So how are you thinking about this in terms of, as Alex mentioned, more of an ecosystem of people involved, saving the environment, but also keeping their jobs?
From what we have seen, in order to provide the best service and the best solution out there, while at the same time the platform for direct employment will be by us servicing the hotel industry. At the moment, they're anyways paying for irresponsible way of managing the problem. So again, we're hoping to be their best friend in terms of managing the problem and getting rid of it while it's still in the ocean before it invades the beaches. So that's what we're launching at the moment, that service. And we're also hoping to bring our hardware across the Caribbean so that others can utilize it and employ it. And that way we can magnify our reach, not only in the DR, but again, across the Caribbean.
So Andres, someone just asked, do you have any plans or are there any agreements between the DR and Haiti in terms of working on this issue?
At a government level, there are no agreements per se, but anyone that is watching us today and will want to hear more about us and how we're partnering with different institutions at all levels, from NGOs to academic, to keep it working on the R&D, and to also then again make available our hardware Caribbean-wide, please reach out to us and we'll be more than happy to make those coordinations. And if need be, also act as liaison between governments.
Yeah, and so just before we continue with some of the other questions, I just would like to plug something about education, and that's the idea that, as Alex mentioned, this idea came out of student research, right? One of the things we believe at MIT is that undergraduates and graduate students can create their own research, being guided by a mentor or a professor like Professor Slocum, and then with that, turn that into or spin it out into a company if the research is good enough. So one of the things that we're looking for, and I think Andres mentioned, Luke, is collaboration, both with universities, governments, the private sectors across the Caribbean. So if anyone here, I'm sure Alex, Andre has his email there, Luke can provide his, but more information that you can. This is a regional problem. It doesn't only affect one country. So the more ideas, the more help that we can get across the region, the better. So please, if you have students, faculty, researchers, private sector, or you're in the hotel industry and this is a solution that you're interested in, please do not hesitate to reach out. Another idea that came in, and I don't know if you guys saw this from Brendan, is the solution to the problem dilution in the deep sea? So what are your feelings about going further out in the deep sea? Again, that would somewhat pull away from the coast, but what are your thoughts in that idea?
Right. So just to be clear, I don't know if I made this clear during the presentation, but we're not planning to do any sinking anywhere near shore. So this is particularly useful in small islands. You know, Mexico obviously has the shelf, and the DR has you know, you have to go about 20 kilometers out from the DR until you really get into the fringes of the Venezuelan basin where it's deep enough. But small islands like Barbados or Jamaica or the Cayman Islands or Trinidad, I mean, you go a kilometer or two off and you drop to 2-3 kilometers depth very quickly. So that's where we would be planning to do this, right? Outside of the photosynthesizing zone where it's going to cover anything like that. So that's the first part, is we're already planning to do this in the very, very deep ocean. And fortunately, the Caribbean is one of the, you know, has some of the deepest areas in the entire Atlantic. The entire Venezuelan basin is where all the sargassum that hits Cancun fluxes through is 3 kilometers deep. So yeah, certainly that is the goal, is to dilute it as much as possible. And also adding on to Professor Slocum's point earlier, you know, not to downplay the risks at all. I think it should be studied as soon as and as urgently as possible. But in the grand scheme of things, the amount of sargassum that's actually causing the problem for us humans and causing the methane output is a small fraction of the sargassum that actually fluxes through the Caribbean every year, and that sinks naturally every year. So when you put it in context, it is already very, very diluted. I mean, if you took all the sargassum that's coming into the Caribbean and you sunk it all right in the Muertos Trough, that's a very small region just south of the DR where we were looking at doing this, you would increase the ground cover by less than a 0.1%, for example. So it's important to keep all of this in context. Even though it's a very big problem for us and it is a large amount of biomass, it's a very small amount of biomass in terms of the overall sargassum flux and the Caribbean at large.
So if anyone other questions, I have a general question. So what's your long-term, right? So we know there's the short-term problem. We know we're coming out of the pandemic. We hope that, let's say 6 months, a year, tourism will be back. What's your feeling? Will the sargassum have a larger impact? Because it seems that we're not hearing about it as much because people aren't traveling, right? But once people start to travel again and the world ramps up, do you think there will be a bigger sargassum problem? What's your feelings? Because again, part of it has to do with people traveling, right? So if people aren't traveling, we don't hear about it, but it doesn't mean that the problem isn't there.
Yeah, the concern is, right, from an environmental standpoint, keeping the Caribbean on track to achieving its, you know, its sustainable development goals, which traditionally it's had trouble with because it's particularly vulnerable to the externalities of climate change, you know, rising sea levels and hurricanes and sargassum, which is a symptom of climate change as well. So that's been really difficult. And yeah, so it's particularly relevant to COVID as well, because you know, there are all these industries like movie theaters and department stores and things like this that, right, are sort of, they were becoming obsolete, but now that decline has become accelerated because of sargassum. And if the problem is not solved soon, you know, I can't tell the future, but looking, you know, if there is an argument that, you know, people have found other ways to travel now, you know, their preferences have changed. Especially with climate change, you know, a lot of Europeans are choosing to take, you know, it's called flight shame, are planning to take train routes rather than spending a couple tons of CO2 to fly to the Caribbean, for example. And who knows, maybe people in the US will be that concerned in the future as well. So the concern is that, you know, COVID and Sargassum are kind of accelerating the decline of Caribbean tourism, which the Caribbean is not ready to transition from its tourism-based economy yet. So, right, I mean, finding a solution to Sargassum is of the utmost importance, especially considering, you know, this pandemic is almost over.
And also important to understand that what has been estimated is that the volume of Sargassum will keep increasing over time. So this is kind of a long-term problem, really. It's not like it's going to disappear as what it looks like. So it's important to understand that as well, not just how it affects the tourism, but the environment at large, as we just expressed.
So there was another question asking about the ecosystems again. And the question is, have you checked out your work's effects on the ecosystem in relation to the tourism industry, such as outsourcing of fish for food?
You know, that's an interesting question. Let me jump in here. Wouldn't it be interesting, particularly on the European flight shame tourism and all the dude ranches, and there's a real popular thing in vacationing of go work on a ranch. My farm, we have a farm over 300 acres woods. We're thinking of doing that to have people help us cut firewood more than just graduate students. And you know, Luke, maybe that's something is invite people to come go out with local folks on an LCM and collect Sargassum to help save the planet and the shoreline.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we could turn this into a, not that it's going to cost tourists. This is an opportunity. Come pay and join the work to clean the planet.
Yeah, it's beach cleanup.
So another question that's come up several times is the tracking using CLS satellite products. So what do you use to direct your operations? How are you predicting where the Sargassum is going?
Yeah, so for the open ocean fleet, we would rely heavily on CLS's systems. And I'm glad that someone just put that in the chat. That is the company that we're partnered with. For the nearshore systems, there are many different forecasting services that hotels already subscribe to. So it would be, you know, the job of the hotel to subscribe to a forecasting service and decide how much collection capacity they want on their 500-meter or kilometer stretch of beach, and we provide that capacity. So that's very important. And CLS is developing some really sophisticated tools, like I said, for seeing through cloud cover and predicting with, you know, pinpoint accuracy what part of the beach and how much Sargassum is going to be landing. So you know, some other systems use just literally, you know, looking at the entire season and making forecasts. At USF, Chonmin, who is doing a lot of that. Texas A&M, they do visual identification just to something out there. But CLS is looking at actually seeing specific mats with 20-meter by 20-meter resolution and telling you where it's going to land and when. So that's a really cool development.
Excellent. And so what are your plans for the upcoming summer, upcoming season? We only have a few minutes left. So if you could give people some sense of what's next, what's coming out of COS, what should we be expecting?
Well, let me make a plug for a Europe. So if you're an MIT undergraduate student looking for something to help save the planet, develop machines to save the planet, improve this process, we have a Europe opportunity to go for 2 people to the DR this summer. I'll be coming down too, you know, on and off. I can't spend the whole summer there, even though I would like to, but to work with Luke and Andres to test these LCMs. So you'd be working shoulder to shoulder with folks who actually depend on this working for their livelihoods. So you'll learn an incredible lot, be able to hopefully contribute to the design, saying, here, whoa, add another screw here, make it better, and build the model.
And are you guys open to local students, whether in the Caribbean or the DR, would be interested in seeing, learning, and taking part?
For sure we are, for sure. And that's part of, you know, our process as well. We're looking to create those alliances and bring on board other team that will help us create and launch these to a better position, create a better system overall as well.
Excellent. Well, so we're just about at the end of our time. More than anything, I'd like to thank everyone in the audience. I'd like to thank you for your great participation. Obviously, this is of great interest to everyone. I'd like to thank May again for setting this up. Andre, Luke, and Alex, this is wonderful research. It's great to see that from a class to reality to saving the environment. So thank you all. Please stay healthy. Please don't forget the MIT Sloan Latin America office. We do about 1 or 2 talks. The rest of the semester will be all about MIT research. So please tune in, and I'll put in the link again where we post all of the YouTube videos. So this video with the talk will be posted. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to email me. Thank you for your time. Stay healthy and have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.